As I cleaned the final table at Joe's Cafe, I glanced at the clock, which was counting down to my nightly freedom. A beacon for the occasional late-night visitor searching for a slice of pie or a cup of coffee, the diner's neon sign buzzed in the peaceful evening air. With every minute that went by, my apron, splattered with today's special, felt heavier. At last, my shift was coming to a conclusion, and the actual labor, the type that made my dreams come true, was about to start. "I'm going to the Rusty Nail, Mama. They requested me to perform a few sets tonight," I called, my voice barely audible over the now deserted cafe. Mom's voice came from behind, over the clatter of dishes, always encouraging yet tired. "Sing like the angels, Elena." The ambiance within the Rusty Nail was very different from the bitter cold outdoors. The soft glow of low lighting and the soft sound of sporadic chatter greeted me as if I were an old acquaintance. I went directly to the small stage, which was less of a feature and more of an afterthought. I got a nod from the proprietor, a muscular man whose smile could light up a room. "Lucana, you got a good crowd tonight. Among them are several prominent producers. Make it worthwhile." "Luna!" Although the name was still unfamiliar to me, Mr. Carter, the producer who had earlier taken a chance on me, emphasized that it was a significant and noteworthy choice. Tonight, he was among the crowd, his keen eyes not missing anything. Some of my favorite songs opened the concert, their notes fusing together to create a tapestry of sound that appeared to put everyone in the room in a trance. I put my entire being into the words, with each line bearing witness to all of my years of aspiration and hard work. Amid a particularly moving ballad, I got Mr. Carter's attention halfway through. With a little smile on his lips, he was nodding slightly. Following my performance, I approached his table with a thumping heart, not from the singing, but from the potential meaning of this encounter. Mr. Carter said, "Elena, you were phenomenal," with a voice as smooth as whiskey that is aged. "That voice of yours needs bigger stages." Tucking a stray hair behind my ear, I flushed. "I'm grateful, Mr. Carter. I'm just happy to be working." He moved a card over the surface. "I want you to sign up for a class at my voice studio, polish those rough edges, and who knows what after that. Perhaps for a few well-known names." Later, under the mottled canvas of the night sky, I felt lighter with each step as I made my way home. My goal was to put forth more effort and shine brighter. Mr. Carter had faith in Luna, but I had faith in myself even more. My entire existence has been nothing more than a crazy race from one microphone to the next, ever since Mr. Carter dragged me into this vortex of vocal exercises and never-ending rehearsals. The voice school was unlike anything I had experienced before. Even though every day was difficult, I felt as though I was getting closer to something significant, something that would change my life, with each note I sang. "Elena, once more you're flat on the high C. Mr. Jennings, the voice instructor who had a knack of transporting you back to elementary school, said, 'Focus.' I apologize. This time I got it. Please give me a moment," I said, squaring my shoulders and blotting the perspiration from my brow. "Everyone give a 5, but not you, Luna." Without barely taking his eyes off his clipboard, he gave an order. "Let's get this right." I took a big breath and was ready for another try as everyone else dispersed for the break room. I got the cue when Mr. Jennings started to play the piano keys. "Okay, Luna, that's it. Hold it there." "Why is it that you can't strike it that way each time?" With a rare smile that broke through his normally serious face, he said. I smiled back, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and relief build up inside of me. "Just needed to warm up, I guess," I said. Some other students were gathered around a table in the break area, their phones plastered to their faces. "You hit a very good note there, Luna. I bet you could break glass with that," chuckled Alex, a classmate who had a way of making everyone smile. "Yeah, well, I'd be happy to shatter expectations," I said as I took a water bottle out of the refrigerator. The conversation turned to the upcoming showcase, where we were all supposed to demonstrate what we'd learned. It was a big deal, with scouts and agents in the audience. Just thinking about it made my stomach do flips. "You ready for the showcase, Luna? Heard some big names might be dropping by," said Alex, his tone turning serious. "Ready as I'll ever be. Just got to keep my cool and show 'em what I'm made of," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The day of the showcase arrived faster than a freight train. Backstage, the air was thick with nerves and hairspray. Stepping out onto the stage, the lights blinded me for a moment. I could see shadows of people out in the audience, some shifting in their seats, others silent in anticipation. The music started, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It was just me and the song. I poured every ounce of emotion I had into the lyrics, letting the melody lift me higher and higher until the final note hung in the air like a promise. The applause that followed was deafening. I couldn't help but smile, basking in the sound of it all. As I walked off the stage, Mr. Carter was waiting in the wings, his usual stern expression replaced with something softer, something akin to pride. As I changed back into my regular clothes and prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Heard your showcase went great. So proud of you. Love you." Smiling, I typed back, "Thanks, Mom. Couldn't have gotten here without you. Love you more." Walking out into the night, the air felt different, lighter somehow, as if the evening itself was whispering of bigger stages and brighter lights just on the horizon. Life on the stage was like nothing else, and I was finally living it big time. Mr. Carter had me opening for names that once felt like they belonged in a different universe. Each concert, each crowd was bigger, louder, more thrilling than the last. Then, at a charity gig decked out with chandeliers and swanky suits, I met David. He was one of those patrons that you know have more money than they know what to do with. But he was different. He actually listened, really listened when I sang. After my set, we got to talking, and something just clicked. "Hey, you really stole the show tonight," he said, his smile easy, his eyes kind. "Thanks. I guess I just try to give it my all," I replied, trying to sound more casual than I felt. We started seeing each other, and it wasn't long before it turned into something real, something deep. On our 1-year anniversary, he took me to this little secluded spot overlooking the city, got down on one knee and popped the question. My heart nearly burst out of my chest. "Yes! Of course, yes!" I blurted out before he even finished asking. It was like a fairy tale, at least until the day he decided it was time I met his parents. The nerves I felt performing in front of thousands didn't come close to the anxiety of meeting David's mother. The way she looked me up and down when David introduced me made it clear she had already formed her opinion before even a hello. "So, Elena, David tells me you're a singer at restaurants, is it?" Her voice dripped with something colder than disdain. "Yes, Mrs. Westwood, I perform at various venues," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea for me to stay cool. "Well, I suppose we all do what we can with what we're given," she sighed, as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders, just thinking about my upbringing. David's father, Mr. Westwood, was a stark contrast. He arrived a few days later from a business trip, and right away, he was warm and engaging. "Elena has quite the voice, Dad. She's open for some pretty big names." David beamed, proud as could be. "That's fantastic. Music's a tough field, takes a lot of grit," Mr. Westwood replied, his nod filled with a respect that felt like a balm to the burn Mrs. Westwood had left. But the relief was short-lived. Mrs. Westwood's comments grew sharper, more frequent. "One must wonder how a young lady gets so far in such an industry, surely not by keeping her virtue intact," she once remarked during a dinner, her words slicing through the air like a knife. I felt my face go hot, my hands clenching into fists under the table. Mr. Carter has been nothing but a mentor to me, Mrs. Westwood. Oh, come now, dear. We all know how these things work. A girl without a father figure is often looking for one, isn't she? She chuckled, as if it was just a bit of harmless fun. Her refusal to see me as worthy gnawed at me, her words echoing in my head long after they were spoken. But David stood by me, his love unwavering. Don't listen to her, Elena. You're amazing, and that's all that matters. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But as we started planning our wedding, Mrs. Westwood's shadow loomed large, making me wonder if I'd ever really be part of their family. The morning of my wedding, I woke up with a belly full of butterflies and a heart overflowing with love. David and I had poured our souls into every detail of the wedding. It was the day we had both been dreaming of. The venue was draped in delicate whites and soft pinks, every petal and candle placed with care. It was perfect, just like I'd always imagined. As I slipped into my dress, a stunning number that made me feel like a star in one of those fancy romance flicks, I couldn't help but catch my mom's teary smile in the mirror. The ceremony started with a swell of music, and as I walked down the aisle, all eyes on me, I saw David at the altar, looking like he'd won the lottery. My nerves settled, replaced by a fierce joy. This was it. This was our moment. As we stood before the priest hand in hand, the traditional question came, "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be married, speak now, or forever hold your peace." The silence that followed was expected. What wasn't expected was the sharp click of a heel and a voice that cut through the quiet like a knife. "I have something to say." It was Mrs. Westwood, standing up in her finery, her face set in a mask of disapproval. Murmurs swirled through the gathered crowd as she started her tirade. This girl, Elena, is nothing but an uneducated dropout who grew up without a father. Her mother conceived her with the first man she met. Do we even know his name? The room went dead quiet, every word from her lips a slap to my face. I felt David's grip tighten around my hands, his jaw clenched. She barely scraped through school and sings at night in eateries in front of all sorts of men. "This is not the kind of woman fit for our family," Mrs. Westwood declared, her voice ringing in the hall. Before I could shrink away, David stepped forward, his voice firm and loud. "Mom, stop." I love Elena. Her past doesn't matter to me. I know her heart, her strength, and her character. That's the woman I chose to marry. His words seemed to silence the room even further, if that was possible. Mrs. Westwood looked stunned, her mouth snapping shut, as she realized her son was not on her side this time. The priest cleared his throat. "Shall we continue?" With a nod from us both, the ceremony went on, but the poison of her words lingered, making my hands tremble and my heart race. It wasn't until the music started for our first dance that I felt a shift. David pulled me close, his hand warm on my back. "Forget everyone else. It's just you and me now," he murmured as we swayed to the music. The first dance with David was like a dream as we glided across the floor, his promises still echoing in my heart. I almost believed that the worst was over. As the last note of our song faded, Mrs. Westwood, flushed from too much champagne, stumbled to the center of the room, grabbing a microphone from the DJ. Such a lovely tradition, the father-daughter dance. "Pity we won't see one tonight, eh?" she slurred, her voice dripping with mockery. A hush fell over the room. I felt every eye on me, the weight of their stares like a blanket of ice. David's grip tightened on my hand, his whisper urgent. "Ignore her, Elena, please." Before I could even muster a response, the side door creaked open and a man, disheveled and dirty, staggered into the spotlight. My heart sank as Mrs. Westwood's cruel laughter cut through the stunned silence. "Look here, Perhaps this is Elena's father, ready for their dance." She jeered. The room erupted in confused murmurs, some gasps, others hushed whispers. I felt my cheeks burn, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. I covered my face, unable to bear the spectacle. Suddenly, the sharp clack of heels announced my mother's arrival on the stage. Her voice, usually so gentle, was steel as she confronted Mrs. Westwood. "This isn't a joke, Diane. You've gone too far. Apologize to my daughter now," Mom demanded, her presence commanding silence. Mrs. Westwood, swaying slightly, just scoffed, her sneer evident even through her slurred words. "Oh, come off it. It's just a bit of fun. Lighten up." That's when Mr. Westwood, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "Diane, enough. What are you thinking?" He turned to the audience, his voice carrying a mix of embarrassment and authority. "This man is an actor hired by my wife as a distasteful joke. I apologize to everyone here, especially to Elena and her family." He then turned sharply to his wife. "You need to leave now." With a huff, Mrs. Westwood tossed the microphone down and stormed out, her exit as dramatic as her antics. As the door slammed behind her, the tension seemed to deflate slightly, and Mom came over to me, pulling me into a tight embrace. "It's okay, baby. Let's not let her ruin your day," she whispered, smoothing back my hair as I fought to regain my composure. "You all right to keep going?" David asked, his eyes searching mine for any sign of retreat. I nodded, wiping my eyes. "Yeah, let's finish this for us." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dances, toasts, and laughter, so much so that by the end of the night, I had almost forgotten the cruel stunt Mrs. Westwood had pulled. Almost, but not quite. Every now and then, the memory would resurface, a sharp stab reminding me that despite the beautiful vows and the joyous celebration, a shadow lingered over our new beginning. Ever since the wedding, Mrs. Westwood had been quieter, but a tiger doesn't change its stripes overnight. When she called me about a charity event she was organizing, her voice had that same old chill. "Elena, you should come to the charity concert next weekend. There will be some truly talented singers there. It might be educational for you," she said, her words dripping with that familiar condescension. I bit my tongue to keep from snapping back. "Sounds lovely, Diane. Who's performing?" She hesitated, a scoff hidden just beneath her breath. "Oh, various artists. I can't quite remember all their names." Typical Diane, setting the stage to belittle me, but I played along. "Well, I'd love to attend. Thanks for the invitation." That very night, Mr. Carter, my producer, called with some interesting news. "Luna, you're set to perform at a charity event next Saturday. It's a big gig, lots of high rollers." I paused, a slow grin spreading across my face as I connected the dots. This wouldn't happen to be the Westwood charity concert, would it? "That's the one. How'd you guess?" Mr. Carter chuckled on the other end. "Just a lucky guess," I replied, my mind already ticking. "Carter, let's keep it under wraps that Luna is actually Elena Westwood, okay? I want it to be a surprise." He laughed, clearly amused by the idea. "You got it, Luna. They'll only see your stage name." The night of the concert, the venue was buzzing with the city's elite, all finely dressed and ready to be entertained. Mrs. Westwood was fluttering around like a peacock, greeting donors and flashing her insincere smiles. As I arrived, hidden behind the stage, I could hear her addressing the crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Your generosity supports a great cause. And now, please welcome the sensational Luna." The crowd clapped politely, some craning their necks to see the rising star Mrs. Westwood had boasted about. I took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. The hush that fell was delicious. As the first few notes of the song filled the air, I began to sing, pouring every ounce of my passion into the words. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mrs. Westwood's rigid posture falter. She fumbled with her phone, probably texting Mr. Carter in a panic. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. I took my bow, my heart soaring as the applause washed over me. It wasn't just a performance, it was a victory. Stepping off stage, I caught snippets of conversations, praises mingled with surprise. Wasn't that Elena Westwood, Diane's daughter-in-law? Yes, the very one. Who would have thought? Mrs. Westwood cornered me backstage, her face a mask of fury barely contained. What is this stunt? You embarrassed me in front of all my guests. I met her glare with a calm I didn't feel. Diane, I was invited to sing. I just did my job. You said yourself you wanted to hear from talented singers. Her lips thinned into a line, and for a moment, I thought she might cause another scene, but she turned on her heel and stormed off instead. After my performance, David and I stood hand in hand, soaking in the success of the evening. My heart was still racing from the thrill of it all, but that high crashed down when Mrs. Westwood took the stage again, her face twisted with disdain. She grabbed the microphone from the MC. While the voice may be delightful, let's not forget who we're applauding, she sneered, her voice echoing through the hall. This famous singer, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing but a bastard born of unknowns, and it's my duty to remind her fans of her true origins. The crowd murmured, the atmosphere thickening with tension. I felt my face drain of color, anger seething within me. Before I could react, my mom stepped onto the stage, elegant and composed, flanked by a man I'd never seen, a bit older than David. Enough, Diane. Mom's voice was calm but carried an undeniable edge. I've had enough of your humiliations toward me and my daughter. It's time some truths came to light. She paused, giving the man next to her a nod. He stepped forward, an envelope in hand. After Elena's wedding, I hired a detective. We discovered some intriguing facts about Diane here. Mom continued, her eyes locked on Mrs. Westwood, who paled under the scrutiny. Years ago, Diane got pregnant by her boyfriend, who promptly abandoned her. Alone and desperate, she met her future husband online. Pretending to want a long correspondence, she actually planned to give up her baby at birth. The murmurs grew louder, the guests shifting uncomfortably as they absorbed the gravity of Mom's words. But fate intervened, Mom said. She kept the baby and met her husband, never revealing her past. The man beside Mom stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I am that baby. Diane, as my mother, abandoned me, and I was raised by foster parents. All my life I've dreamed of meeting her, my biological mother. He held up the envelope. This DNA test confirms everything. Diane, you are my mother, and David is my brother. The hall erupted into whispers and gasps. Mrs. Westwood's face crumpled, her usual poise crumbling as the reality of her deceit was laid bare for all to see. Mr. Westwood, who had been standing off to the side, his expression unreadable, finally spoke, his voice booming over the noise. I can't believe this, Diane. To think you've lied about something so fundamental. I need time to think about all of this. Mr. Westwood turned and left the hall, his shoulders heavy. The crowd's buzzing grew louder, filled with indignation and shock at the duplicity of Mrs. Westwood. Amidst the chaos, she fled the room, her departure as dramatic as her life had been deceptive. Mr. Carter, who had been watching from the sidelines, approached us, a supportive smile on his face. Elena, why don't you give us one more song? What about honesty and love, perhaps? Nodding, I took the stage again. The opening notes of the song filled the room, a melody about truth and the courage it takes to face it. As I sang, the earlier tension dissipated, replaced by a collective catharsis. The applause at the end was overwhelming, not just for the performance, but for the truth as it rang out. I saw my mom wiping away tears of pride. After the fiasco that blew up at the charity event, things changed drastically for everyone involved. Mrs. Westwood, once the queen bee of her social circles, found herself isolated. After the divorce, Mr. Westwood couldn't see past the deception, and he ended their marriage, leaving her with nothing but a modest allowance. I heard through the grapevine that her former friends turned their backs, shunning her from gatherings and charity events that she once dominated. It's like she vanished from the social scene entirely. In the interim, my career flourished beyond my wildest expectations. I was in the news because of the scandal, and not simply because of my singing. The tale, the effort, and the courage required to confront such a public betrayal moved many. When I was preparing to start my debut album, Mr. Carter contacted. "It's time to put all of this into your music, Luna. Are you prepared to begin recording your album?" "Over the phone," he said, his eagerness palpable. "Carter, I am, for sure." "Let me demonstrate my capabilities to them," I retorted, experiencing a surge of eagerness within me. David became close to Michael, his newfound brother, in the midst of everything. It was a glimmer of hope among a sea of gloom. They got together frequently, seeking solace and comprehension in their similar, albeit complex, familial relationships. I sat down one day with my mother, the person who has supported me through all of my highs and lows. Her charming kitchen filled us with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. "Mom, there are never enough words to express my gratitude. You've been my pillar of support," I said, my voice brimming with passion. "You don't have to thank me, honey." Like any mother, I took action. She sipped her coffee, her eyes misting. "Plus, seeing you handle everything with such grace, that's all the thanks I need," she murmured. As I worked on my record, every song began to feel like a fragment of my journey, a melody reflecting my setbacks and victories. David was always there for me, and having Michael around added another level of complexity to our lives. Although life had an odd way of working out, I was happy with everyone's final destination.